The sky was overcast that Friday afternoon. A gentle drizzle misted the sidewalks of a quiet suburban neighborhood in Georgia. Children played in distant yards, and the low hum of a passing mail truck blended into the stillness. But peace has a way of breaking suddenly, and when it does, it leaves a scar across the silence. That's exactly what happened when the piercing sound of a gunshot tore through the calm air like a jagged blade. Seconds later, a woman screamed, a car horn blared, and bystanders froze in horror. A black woman, unarmed and alone, had just been shot by police officers right there in the middle of the street. Her name was Maya Caldwell. 33 years old, mother of one, and a quiet force of calm in the community. On that day, Maya had just left the grocery store, reusable bags in hand, and was walking back to her car. Her only crime? She matched the vague description of a suspicious person in the area, a term far too often used to justify racial profiling. The responding officers didn't ask questions. They demanded, barked orders, drew weapons. Within seconds, panic took over and one of the officers, his hand trembling, fired. Blood seeped across Maya's beige trench coat as she fell to the pavement, groceries rolling away. Witnesses shouted. Phones came out. A child began crying. But in the midst of all that chaos, no one, not even the officers, knew who Maya really was. She wasn't just another civilian. No, Maya had a past. One tied directly to some of the highest-ranking names in the U.S. military. And in less than 60 seconds, those connections would shake the entire system to its core. Welcome to Talecraft, where real-life stories are told with truth, heart, and justice. If this is your first time here, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We dive deep into stories that challenge the powerful, uplift the unheard, and remind us all what courage truly looks like. Here's a question for you. Do you still believe justice works when the system fails? You might want to answer that after hearing what happened next. So what exactly happened that triggered a national uproar? It started with a single moment of brutality, one too many in a long chain of racial injustice. But what set this story apart was what followed just 1 minute after Maya hit the ground. As her military ID card slipped from her jacket pocket and fluttered onto the wet asphalt, a nearby bystander, an Army reservist, saw the name. His eyes widened. He didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone and called a number few civilians even have access to. "You've got to see this," he said into the phone. "They just shot Major Caldwell." Yes, Major Maya Caldwell. A decorated intelligence officer who had served 2 tours in the Middle East, who held multiple commendations, and who had once briefed Pentagon officials directly. And now, she lay bleeding on a civilian street, treated like a suspect because of her skin color, not her sacrifice. The Army doesn't forget its own, and when one of theirs is hurt unjustly, they respond. Why does this story matter? Because it's more than just another case of injustice. It's a wake-up call about how dangerously routine racial profiling has become, and how even our nation's heroes aren't safe when the bias runs deep. Maya's story shows us that no badge is above accountability, and no act of injustice will go unnoticed when the right people are watching. Her fall sparked not just local outrage, but a ripple effect that reached the Pentagon in less than 5 minutes. As you listen to the rest of this story, remember, injustice doesn't just harm its target, it wounds the soul of a nation. And when justice finally does call back, sometimes it doesn't come with handcuffs. Sometimes it comes in combat boots. So how did it all begin? Let's rewind. Before the sirens. Before the cameras. Before the shot. Let's go back to the start of that day, the morning Maya Caldwell woke up and had no idea she'd become the center of a national reckoning. The morning of the incident started like any other. Maya Caldwell rose early, just after 5:30 a.m. as she always did. Years in the military had drilled discipline into her bones. Her mornings were sacred, quiet moments spent journaling, stretching, and listening to classical music. Though no longer on active deployment, Maya remained an intelligence officer with the Army Reserves and still held the rank of major. Her weekends were often spent volunteering at the local shelter or mentoring young girls in the ROTC program. In her neighborhood, most simply knew her as Miss Maya, kind, composed, always helpful. But few knew the extent of the life she'd lived. Maya had served in both Afghanistan and Syria, gathering sensitive intelligence behind enemy lines. Her team once intercepted coded chatter that helped prevent an attack on U.S. troops stationed at Bagram. For that, she received a Bronze Star. But despite her accolades, Maya never boasted. She wore her service quietly, like the small Army pin tucked on her bag that day, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. That Friday, she had taken the day off to prepare for her daughter's 10th birthday. Her first stop? The grocery store. At 1:07 p.m., Maya exited the sliding glass doors of Westview Mart with 2 paper bags in hand. She wore a tan coat, blue jeans and ankle boots. Her curly hair was pulled into a low bun. Nothing about her stood out, unless, of course, you were already looking for someone black to blame. Minutes earlier, a local business owner had called the police reporting a suspicious black woman pacing near the side of the building. The caller didn't mention a weapon. Didn't describe erratic behavior. Just looked like she didn't belong. Maya had paused in that same area briefly to rearrange her bags, something she did often to balance weight. That was enough. Enough for dispatch to send out a patrol car. Enough for officers Jackson and Turner to roll up with lights on. Enough for them to draw their weapons before even assessing the scene. By the time they shouted commands, Maya had just reached her car, keys in hand. She turned around slowly, confused but not afraid. She'd faced real threats before. She had stared down insurgents. She had been in war zones. This wasn't war, she thought. This was home. Hands where I can see them, one officer barked. I'm just trying to get to my car, she began. Stop moving, the other shouted. Maya froze. Her military training kicked in, calm voice, steady tone. I'm reaching into my coat for my ID, she said. But her hand didn't even make it halfway before a shot rang out. It struck her shoulder, spinning her sideways. She fell hard onto the pavement, bags scattering. A tomato rolled into the gutter. Milk spilled across the sidewalk like blood. Everything after that happened in a blur. Witnesses screamed. Some began recording. The officers backed away, unsure whether to render aid. But then something critical happened. As Maya rolled to her side in agony, her wallet slipped from her coat. A laminated ID card fluttered free, glinting in the dull light. A young man named Darian, who had been watching from across the street, rushed forward despite the officers yelling at him to stay back. He recognized the name. Maya Caldwell. He had seen her at a Veterans Day event just months earlier. Darian was a reservist. 24 with 2 years of service. He knew exactly what a major's ID looked like. He grabbed it, turned, and immediately dialed a restricted Army hotline. Major Caldwell just got shot by police, he told the dispatcher. She's unarmed, she's bleeding and she needs help, now. The man on the other end didn't ask many questions. He just said one thing, hold the line. Meanwhile, back at the scene, Maya lay half-conscious, lips moving faintly. Call my CO, she whispered. Tell them, it was me, her eyes fluttered closed. Back at Fort Gordon, the call triggered a protocol rarely seen outside of combat zones. Maya had once worked under Colonel Jordan Voss, now a strategic operations commander. The moment he heard her name, he dropped everything. Within seconds, military command centers began lighting up, because when an active ranking officer is shot on domestic soil, everything changes. This wasn't just another shooting. This was a breach of honor. Local police were unaware that their target was one of the Army's own. Even when paramedics arrived and began treating Maya, they had no idea who she was. But Darian wasn't done. He uploaded the footage he captured, including Maya's ID and badge, to a secure veterans network. It spread like wildfire. Military personnel began texting each other. Retired generals, active duty soldiers, Pentagon aides. Within 15 minutes, the phrase Major Maya Caldwell was trending among encrypted channels and military forums. And the tone was unified, this is unacceptable. Maya was rushed into surgery by 1:45 p.m. She was stable but in critical condition. When doctors wheeled her in, they noticed a small tattoo above her ribcage, the insignia of her former unit, Task Force Shadow. Beneath it, a quote in Latin, Fortis fortuna aduvat, fortune favors the brave. She had survived worse, but now she was fighting a different kind of war, one she never asked for. Colonel Voss made the first official call to the Georgia Police Command at 2:05 p.m. You just shot one of our majors, he said flatly. This is no longer just a civil matter. That was the moment everything changed. It had been 3 days since the shooting. The hospital room where Aaliyah lay in a medically induced coma was cold, quiet, and filled with a silence so thick it nearly strangled her mother, Darlene. But outside those sterile walls, a storm was building. Aaliyah's name had begun to spread. A passerby had captured part of the incident on their phone, just enough to show the sound of shots, the shouting, and Aaliyah's lifeless body on the pavement. That single clip was enough to ignite fury. Darlene, shattered but resolute, sat beside her daughter's bed as she scrolled through messages of support and outrage from strangers, activists, and soldiers. Among those names, one stood out, a colonel from the U.S. Army. His message was short but powerful, she served with honor, We stand with you. That was the moment Darlene realized this wasn't just her battle anymore. Her daughter had a military family, one that didn't forget. 2 years earlier, Aaliyah had enlisted in the Army Reserve while pursuing her law degree. Few knew she'd done 2 overseas tours, quietly earning the respect of her commanders for her intelligence and courage under pressure. Darlene recalled the night Aaliyah returned from Afghanistan. She hadn't come home with fanfare or medals on display, just her duffel bag, tired eyes, and a hug that felt like it held years of stories she couldn't share. Now, the military was responding not just out of protocol but out of brotherhood. The colonel who messaged Darlene? He'd served with Aaliyah. And he wasn't the only one. Her commanding officer began calling media outlets. A public statement followed, condemning the use of force and confirming Aaliyah's honorable service. The message was clear: she wasn't just another headline. She was a soldier. And if the justice system wouldn't defend her, the U.S. Army was about to make its presence felt. Darlene's next step was strategic. With the backing of military veterans and a growing list of human rights organizations, she held a press conference on the courthouse steps. "My daughter bled in a war zone for this country," she said, voice steady though her hands trembled. "And you expect me to believe that 3 officers couldn't recognize that the woman they gunned down was wearing a dog tag around her neck?" The media erupted. The officers involved had already begun shifting their stories, but the facts were stacking against them. Bodycam footage, initially missing, was suddenly recovered, thanks to pressure from military advocates. What it showed was devastating. Aaliyah complying, hands visible, before a sudden shove and then gunshots. The footage was sent to the Pentagon. In response, they issued a formal inquiry demanding accountability. The local department tried to push back, but the moment federal investigators stepped in, the house of cards began to fall. Behind the scenes, a different kind of pressure mounted. Several state officials who had initially stayed quiet now felt the weight of public opinion. Donations for Aaliyah's medical care surged, and a petition calling for the resignation of the police chief reached over 2 million signatures in 48 hours. Meanwhile, Darlene wasn't resting. She reached out to civil rights attorneys, filed a lawsuit against the department, and requested a federal civil rights investigation. But perhaps the most shocking development came when it was revealed that one of the officers involved had previously been reported for excessive force, 5 times. Each time it had been swept under the rug. This time that rug was on fire. As one Army veteran posted on social media, "If the law won't defend Aaliyah, the people will." The city was no longer looking at a simple case of police brutality, it was facing a reckoning. And the mother they had underestimated was leading the charge. The courtroom was packed on the day of the first major hearing. Journalists, activists, off-duty officers, and a small group of veterans in uniform filled the seats, their presence loud even in silence. Darlene sat in the front row. The courtroom fell into a hush as the judge entered with the final ruling in hand. Every breath seemed suspended in the air. Darlene's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from years of holding back. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the silence exploded into muffled gasps, sobs, and stunned murmurs. The officers involved in Aaliyah's shooting, once arrogant and smug in their uniforms, now stood as convicted criminals. The lead cop, who had laughed at the press conference weeks earlier, now broke down in visible panic. It wasn't just prison time, it was national disgrace. Darlene didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and whispered her daughter's name like a prayer. The judge acknowledged Aaliyah's service, her sacrifice, and the trauma inflicted upon a family that had already given so much to the nation. Reporters rushed out to send headlines flying. "Justice for Aaliyah. Cops convicted." The news blared across the country. And outside the courthouse, a group of U.S. Army veterans stood in a straight line, saluting Darlene as she walked out. There were no cheers, only the quiet dignity of honor restored, and a sense that something bigger had just begun. The city's police chief resigned the next morning. Protests that had raged in chaos before now turned into candlelight vigils and organized reform campaigns. But Darlene wasn't finished. She took her pain and turned it into purpose. Within a week, she launched the Aaliyah Strong Foundation, aimed at supporting victims of police violence and advocating for legal reforms. Across the country, celebrities donated. Military leaders spoke up. And Aaliyah's story reached international news. Her name was now on banners, murals, and classrooms where kids were taught the value of standing for justice, even when it's hard. Meanwhile, Darlene testified before Congress. In front of lawmakers, she held up her daughter's bullet-ridden vest and said, "This vest protected our country. But our country didn't protect her." The room went silent. Legislation was introduced days later to expand federal oversight of local police departments. While the path was long, that day marked the beginning of real change. Darlene had turned the courtroom into a platform, her grief into fuel. And as the bills moved forward, one reporter aptly noted, "They shot a soldier, and woke the conscience of a nation." That quote went viral. But for Darlene it was only ever about one thing, her girl. Months later, the police department where the shooting occurred was entirely restructured. Officers now wore body cameras, underwent racial bias training, and were required to pass new psychological evaluations. A new chief was appointed, someone who publicly apologized to Darlene and offered to work with the Aaliyah Strong Foundation. And yet, in the stillness of the night, Darlene still felt the void of her daughter's laughter, the gap in her home where Aaliyah's boots once stood. On what would have been Aaliyah's 29th birthday, Darlene stood at a newly renamed park, Aaliyah Thompson Memorial Green, and addressed a crowd of veterans, students, and local families. "My daughter served to defend our freedom," she said, her voice steady, "and she died reminding us that freedom must be defended at home too." Balloons were released. The sky was dotted with bright colors, but none more radiant than the gold star banner fluttering beside the American flag. Behind Darlene, a granite statue of Aaliyah had been unveiled, rifle slung on her back, eyes focused forward. It didn't bring her back. Nothing could. But it gave the next generation something to remember. Not just the pain, but the power of standing up even when the odds are stacked high. The impact of Aaliyah's story didn't stop at the city's borders. Universities began including her case in law and criminal justice programs. A movie deal was signed with proceeds pledged to civil rights causes. And soldiers from all branches started wearing small pins on their uniforms, a purple heart crossed with a scale of justice, in her memory. One day, Darlene received a letter in the mail. It was from a young black girl who had nearly dropped out of high school after her brother was racially profiled and jailed. She wrote, "I saw your story, and I stayed. I want to be a lawyer now. Because if you can fight for your daughter, maybe I can fight for my brother." That one letter reminded Darlene why she continued. The movement wasn't just about justice, it was about survival, healing, and hope. Aaliyah's name wasn't just trending anymore, it was transforming lives. And although Darlene never wanted to be a national symbol, she accepted the burden like a soldier accepts orders. The cost had been unbearable, but the mission was clear. Protect the innocent. Hold the corrupt accountable. And make sure no mother ever has to bury a daughter for serving her country, and being black while doing it. Thank you for being part of this powerful journey today. If you're still here, then you know that this isn't just another story, it's a reflection of everything we must stand against and stand for. Aaliyah Thompson was more than a name, more than a victim. She was a daughter, a patriot, and a symbol of how love can drive justice. At Tailcraft, we bring you stories that spark conversation, awaken empathy, and hopefully inspire action. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep telling the stories that matter. Have you ever witnessed injustice up close? Or do you know someone who turned pain into purpose? Comment below, we read every single one. Together we are not just listeners, we are witnesses, allies, and storytellers in our own right. The fight for justice doesn't end in courtrooms, it begins in living rooms, classrooms, and even right here in videos like this. Until next time, remember, one voice can tremble a system. And sometimes that voice begins with a mother's cry that turns into a nation's roar. Aaliyah lives on, not just in memory but in every single step we take toward truth. This is Tailcraft and we're just getting started.